Hi, my name is Ashik Raman. I am an infrastructure advisor in Sydney, and today I would like to share with you the three biggest risks that I've taken in my 8 year long career and why I think that they have been the best decisions I've ever made for my growth, even though I really didn't know it at the time of making those decisions. The first big risk that I took was choosing a graduate role at one of Australia's biggest banks, Commonwealth Bank, over the more traditional path that most engineering and commerce students took at the time, which was to secure a role in the engineering industry, whether or not it's as a design engineer, like an engineering consultant, whether it's going on the site side and working for a contractor, or something more office based but still in the industry, like being an estimator. So the story is that as I was approaching the end of my 5.5 year long engineering and commerce degree, sorry, civil engineering and commerce degree at the University of New South Wales back in 2017, I was ridiculously applying for every single graduate program I could potentially get in engineering. I really wanted to be a structural engineer at the time, so I thought, why not just go for every engineering company I can come up with? But unfortunately, I found that I was kind of struggling with getting responses, with securing at least an interview at an engineering firm. So I thought, why not just apply for other types of roles and go more broad, because I had a commerce degree too, so why not? So I decided to apply at a range of other companies like the big banks. I applied at Westbank, Combank, even at Allianz, an insurance company. And it turned out at the time that I started getting a lot of responses for commercial roles. So I went for an interview at Commonwealth Bank, and I actually really, really loved the interview process, and I managed to secure a role there as a graduate at the bank. And the crazy thing that happened with me was that as I was going through that interview process, I just I realized that I actually really felt a connection, and I felt something in my gut that told me that this would be a really great opportunity. So when I got the offer, I happily, very, very happily accepted the role. I then entered into this phase not long after where I was immediately questioning that decision, because I saw all of my friends around me get offers, lots of offers at engineering firms, at contracting firms like the big builders, and I was thinking, what am I doing? Why am I going for a role at a bank? I should be an engineer. And believe it or not, I did something crazy. I was reaching this point of confusion, to the point where, so I actually did land an offer with one of Australia's biggest contractors. It's a tier one contractor. And I rejected that offer for the role at Combank. But then later on, after accepting the role at Combank, I reached out to that company again to say, hey, look, I changed my mind. Is it actually possible for me to take on that role that you offered me before? And they basically said, no, we can't do that because you've already declined the offer. And at that point, I was devastated and thinking to myself, oh no, what have I done? I should have taken that offer. But I decided, look, okay, I'll just go with it. I'll stick with Combank. So that's kind of the headspace where I was at. I didn't know at the time that the Combank offer was actually the best possible direction I could take in my career. And here is why. I went through a 1.5 year graduate program at Combank, not really knowing what to expect. Yeah, not really having any expectations at all. And it ended up being the best experience possible for my first job as a graduate, because at a place like Combank, they really give you the experience of going wide. And by going wide, I mean, I really got to, like, they talk about this thing called being T-skilled at Combank, which is where You spend a decent amount of time going. So if you have a T here, you spend a decent amount of time gaining depth in a particular skill or field or area, which is the big chunky part of the T. And then with the width of the T, that's where you go wide and you learn a broad range of skills, like your ability to present, so presentation skills, your ability to build relationships with people, be a more holistic problem solver, things like that. And when I was at Combank, I really got this great experience to touch on the generalist side of me and pick up a lot of these general skills or a lot of more generalized experiences that didn't go deep into a particular technical skill like coding or deep into project management. I just got to dip into everything. But the reason why accepting the role at Combank was so valuable to me and a risk worth taking was that it really pushed me outside of my comfort zone. It helped me realize that I was actually an introvert at heart because a large part of the graduate program pushed me to work with groups of other graduates and other people that were kind of at my stage. And I had never been in a situation where I had been involved with so much group work. And you know how they say that the big part of what makes you an introvert is your social battery. How long you can last before your battery gets ultimately drained out and then you just need a break. And I really had those limits pushed with me pretty hard. But it was really valuable for me to go through that because it helped me realize that, okay, I need to learn how to work with what I've got, and maybe I can learn ways to push my boundaries in a way where it is actually sustainable. So if I didn't go through this experience at Combank, I never would have really known or learned that lesson earlier. The next thing is that working at Combank first really gave me good standards in terms of work culture, and it set the bar very high for me in a way that was very helpful. As you know, Combank is Australia's largest bank, so obviously with Australia's largest bank, that's doing pretty well for itself financially. They've got a lot of room to a lot of room and resources to invest in good, healthy work culture. Because I was exposed to that, it set the bar at a place where every other workplace I would work at in the future, I'd be able to compare it to Combank to know whether something was very, very much off or whether something was just normal and it was fine. The next reason why taking the opportunity with Combank was so worthwhile was something very unexpected. But I met some of the most incredible people that I'm with some of which I'm still very good friends with today. Like I made some really great friendships with people. And if I didn't take that opportunity to work at Combank and be a graduate there, I just wouldn't have met those people. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is that because it was a graduate program that was quite broad, it was a commercial graduate program. At that grad program, they accepted students from a wide range of degrees. It wasn't just commerce students. There were pure engineering students, there were art students, law students, digital media students, students from a wide range of degrees. And, if I was to accept a role in an engineering company, for example, I would mainly be exposed to students that just came from engineering degrees. And not to say there's anything wrong with that or there's something, boring about that. It's just that, it ended up being a really enriching experience for me personally, just because I got that exposure from the get-go. So, yeah, taking the risk or opportunity at Combank was a really worthwhile decision for me. And even though it happened by accident that I didn't pull out, uh, because I was really scared about making the wrong decision, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I didn't pull out. I'm so glad that I stuck with it. The next really worthwhile risk that I took was pursuing and taking an opportunity to transition my career from working in financial services to being a structural engineer. And this happened back in 2019. So, look, the story is that throughout university, I really thought that I wanted to be a structural engineer. I was really excited by it. For years, I applied for countless internships at structural engineering firms, did not succeed at that. And even when it came to graduate roles, I didn't succeed at that. But about 1 year into my graduate job at Combank, I kept thinking about what I was potentially missing out on. And I think what triggered that was while I was going through this graduate program and I was becoming more of a generalist, utilizing, I guess, the bigger part of the T within my skill set. I saw some other grads around me that were in more of a technical graduate program, like there was an analyst grad program and like a digital grad program. And I looked at them and I kind of, I guess I was just admiring them with this fact that they had these, I guess they were learning these deeper technical skills in a particular thing that was really interesting to them. And I felt like as I was going through this more of a generalist graduate program, I wasn't learning any technical skills. And it just made me think about what I missed out on with structural engineering. And another two things held true for me about 1 year in. One was that I started to feel or wake up to the fact that I wasn't passionate about financial services. Like I thought Combank was an exciting place to work. It was really fun. The people there were great. The work culture was great. For a potential future career, it's a place you can be really happy. But for me, I just wasn't passionate about the end outcome, which was financial services, which was, helping someone do their banking better or helping someone, get a mortgage on their house or take out a personal loan or a credit card. It wasn't an outcome that I was very passionate with. I realized deep down I was very much still excited by the residential, well, not necessarily the residential, but the construction industry. I still got excited by cranes, by buildings, by big construction. And so I thought to myself, okay, you know what? Screw it. Let's just apply for graduate structural engineering roles again. And so I happened to do that. I started doing that about 1 year in. But then at the same time, I was still applying for full-time roles at Combank because the way it worked as a grad is, you'd do the grad program for 2 years, but then you'd still need to apply for a job after the grad program. You're not guaranteed a job. You need to apply for a job like everyone else does to get a job at Combank. But obviously, because you've worked there as a grad, you've got a bit of a competitive edge. But even then, getting a job post-grad program at Combank wasn't that easy. A lot of people struggled. So at the same time, I was applying for jobs within Combank. And then, fast track 6 months later, pretty much finished the grad program. And it turned out that I had secured a role as a credit risk analyst. And at the same time, I also got offered a role as a graduate structural engineer at a very, very small structural engineering company in Sydney. And I was faced with a very tough decision. Go with this role at Combank, where I would have gotten a decent salary as someone at my age, or go for this role as a graduate structural engineer at a very small firm. Like Combank's 50,000 strong, I think, at the time, and that company just had like 20 people. Big difference, right? And as well as that, the salary they were offering me was 35% lower than what I was offered for that job at Combank. Knowing that, I decided to say screw it and listen to my gut. My gut was telling me I needed to follow my passion and just forget about the money, forget about how difficult it may be going from such a large organization with a lot of resources to a small one, and just go for it, get my foot in the door. And so I did that. And here's the thing. That experience going to this smaller firm, it was a very, very eye-opening one. And what really, really helped me get through that experience was the fact that I started off at Combank first. Remember how I told you how it was so worthwhile for me to experience a place with really good and healthy culture, a place with good standards. There was this place that I first started my career in as a structural engineer in, and you know, it was a great place to learn initially, but uh, I from what I experienced, there were a lot of things that came out to me as red flags. And I stayed in it for the opportunity to keep learning with that company and building, you know, my base of technical skills. And I met some really good people, but about 1 year in, I decided to say, stop it. And I quit that job for no job. Just because I realized at the time that it was much better for me to get my head out of that game, which didn't feel that healthy, and look for a job at a slightly bigger company where I can continue my career as a structural engineer. And so I did that. And, you know, after 6 months of trying, I finally got that job as a structural engineer at this much more bigger company. And that company was so much better in terms of the work culture and everything like that. And over those 4 years, I learned so much. It was really cool. It was really cool. I finally had this opportunity to go deep into this technical skill set, which is structural engineering. I got to go on inspections. I got to live that part of me that wanted to solve complex problems. And I also got to work with people and clients who are builders. But about 4 years in, and after becoming a chartered structural engineer, that feeling came back to me, that gut feeling telling me that something was off. There were a few reasons, which maybe one or two that I won't go into in this video, but probably the biggest reason, the biggest thing that came to me was this overwhelming feeling of the fact that I wasn't tapping into my potential. Remember how I said at Combank, as a grad, I was becoming more of a generalist, and there was nothing wrong with that. In fact, it was a really good thing for me. And as a structural engineer, I became a bit more of a specialist. You know, as a specialist in this very technical field, which is a very worthwhile experience to have. What I realized from spending 5 years as a structural engineer was that I needed to be in a field that allowed me to tap into both of them, but something that was a bit more on the generalist side for me to feel fulfilled. That's one thing. And I say that because I felt that I had so much more to bring to the table in terms of my potential as someone who likes communicating, someone who enjoys building relationships with other people, someone who likes presenting. You know, when I was at that second engineering company, I received so much positive feedback about my ability to present, and I wanted to double down on that and be in a field where I get to do that more often. It wasn't something that I got to experience that often as a structural engineer, unfortunately, unless I kind of forced my way to that opportunity. The next thing is that aside from this feeling of not being able to tap into my potential, it was also this feeling of, you know, as a structural engineer, I was designing buildings, I was designing structures, and it was kind of like one structure at a time. And from the perspective of the amount of people I could impact, I really felt the limitation. Now, I was mainly working on residential structures, and it is a very fulfilling thing knowing that you're contributing to the design of a tall residential tower. You know, so many people are going to be living in that tower, and you get to be part of the reason that those people get to feel safe. But for me, I reached a point where I wanted to be even more bigger picture. I wanted to impact more people. And for me, what I realized was that the way to impact people was through working on infrastructure projects. What is infrastructure? Infrastructure is energy projects, it's water projects, it's transport, it is, what else is there? It's education, it's health. Think about how many people go through a hospital every day. Think about how many people use highways, how many people use the water systems. But obviously what came to me was this thought of, well, how do I help them as a structural engineer? So what I learned was that there was this field that I had never heard of before called infrastructure advisory. And infrastructure advisory is the field where I'm in now. And it was really cool the more I started to learn about it. I learned that infrastructure advisors were people that, for the most part, tended to help clients who in many cases were the public sector, and they helped them make better investment decisions. And I know that sounds really vague, but an example of that is say that there's a big metro project coming up. They want to build a new city metro, say City Metro 3.0. Obviously a project like that is going to cost tens of billions of dollars. So when the government picks a company or a set of companies to build it, they need to make sure that those companies are the right ones, because they are playing or putting on the line a lot of public money and money that may not come from the public. So the process involved with the government picking the right contractor or group of contractors, it's so complex. It requires a lot of expertise to be able to do that. So that's where they procure in these infrastructure advisors who guide them through that process. It requires people who understand the industry, understand metro, understand commercial principles, understand procurement and transaction principles. Very cool. And then the other side of the story is, once you pick this right contractor or set of contractors, what about the actual contracts that bind the government to these contractors? That in itself is a very, very intense piece of work that requires specialists or generalists, if you may say, that commercial advisors who understand contracts, who understand the industry. That's where these infrastructure advisors come in. So, that's just a little piece of what it is that I learned about. And basically in the last 6 months of my engineering career, I went really hard on looking for this opportunity to be an infrastructure advisor. And I eventually landed on the opportunity, and I decided to take the risk. And even though I'd just become chartered as a structural engineer, I decided to, be real with myself with the fact that I did not want to climb this ladder as a structural engineer. I wanted to climb a ladder that made me feel more fulfilled and rewarded for my time and energy and the risk that I take on. And this career is one that I can safely say, after 5 weeks of being an infrastructure advisor, I am so grateful I took on that risk. So, I'm super excited for what the next few years will bring along for me in terms of opportunities. I'm already working on a cool, bunch of different water projects, which are all about, enhancing the kind of water flow in the Murray-Darling Basin. And yeah, I feel very content with the decisions I've made. It's only because of the fact that I have taken these risks to, firstly, rather than be an engineer in my first job, work at Commonwealth Bank and become more of a generalist, to then take the next risk to give up that stability that I had and potential really positive future growth at Combank for a role as a structural engineer, taking a massive cut in pay. But I really want to try out my technical skills, and then after 5 years of that and becoming chartered, take the risk again to change industries one more, maybe last time, who knows, to be an infrastructure advisor, which I think helps me get the best of both worlds. So these are 3 risks that I have taken that I honestly am so grateful that I took. And I think the biggest message here from me is that don't be afraid to listen to your gut. If your gut's telling you something, it's probably really worth listening to. That's what I've done in each of these 3 cases. I've made a decision. And while I may not have realized these things at the time about how valuable those decisions were, I can tell you now, looking back over the last 7-8 years, it's these decisions that have really brought me to this place where I am now, where I'm feeling really content. There are so many other feelings I could have, like, if I started this career as an infrastructure advisor right after graduating, I would have already been in it for 7 years. I would have been so much ahead of the game, because in a way I'm starting from the bottom as an infrastructure advisor, not the bottom. The good thing about them is they really acknowledge my experience over the last 7 years, but I would have been so much further in this field. But I don't have those feelings that much, because these collective experiences have really helped me mature and become familiar with what it is that matters to me and how I want to spend my time. Anyways, thank you for listening. I really hope me sharing these experiences and lessons about the risks that I took, which ended up being really great things for me. I really hope that it's something that's insightful for you and it can help you with your own career decisions. Thank you for listening.